Hi, Clayton Springfield Leather Company. Today we wanted to talk about a few different basic styles of snaps, how to set them, which parts go together, and the proper thickness of leather to set your snaps in. We get a lot of questions about different kinds of snaps. How thick does your leather have to be? What size hole do you have to punch? What snaps are appropriate for what project? And so we're just going to cover very briefly 3 basic styles today. The first snap style we want to cover is the bar snap. The bar, seen here, it replaces your post and stud. Now I'll show you how to fix it onto your leather piece. I'm going to start out by grabbing it in a pair of pliers. You can use needle nose. I've just got a pair of pliers here with some leather on the tip so it doesn't mar it. And so I just like to position it over the leather like so, and then clamp it down on each end to get it to stay put. Once you get that clamped down, we actually sell a bar snap setter, which looks like this here. You can see the little nipple on the bar goes into the divot on the setter to set it flat. Now the big thing about setting any snap is keeping your setter as straight up and down as possible and striking it as true as you can. Just a couple whacks to get it flattened out, and there you go. Alright, so now we've got our bar set onto our piece of leather. We're going to move on to setting our cap and socket. Now we'll place our cap through the leather and place it on the anvil, and put our socket on top of the cap. And now the trick here is to mine the 2 small spring bars inside of the socket. Make sure our setter goes between those 2 spring bars and sits on top of the cap post. And we'll kind of hold that down with our fingers. Hold your setter straight up. Strike it a couple times, and it should be set firmly on there. Your snap should be functional and ready to go. Alright, moving on. Next we'll move on to spring snaps, which are essentially the same thing as the bar snap, but like I said, the bar just replaces your stud and post. So we'll set a couple of these. We're going to go ahead and start with our cap and socket. We'll place in the end of our little coin purse here. Now these are the 12.5 millimeter spring snaps, and they set, this is exactly the same process for the 10 millimeter spring snaps, except you use a different setter. This is a setter for the 10 millimeter, and we'll grab our 12.5 millimeter, which is a little bit larger for the larger post of the 12.5. Again, make sure your setter goes between the spring bars before you start pounding on it. Get that set on there. I don't know if you can see that. Whenever you know you have it set well, whenever it mushrooms over the post nice and evenly and it's not bent too far one way or the other. And we'll go ahead and do our post and stud. So I just stuck the stud through the leather, and I'm going to take I stuck the post through the leather, and I'm going to take the stud, put it right on top of the post, and use the other 12.5 millimeter spring snap setter. Just got the little hole in the end to go right over the stud. Hold it straight up and down. Whack it on there a couple times, and there you go. Your stud shouldn't turn or move. If you don't get it set tight enough, it will pop off there. So just give it a good few strikes and it should be fine. One thing you got to watch out for is if your leather is too thin and you have too much post inside of your stud, then it'll actually flare the stud out to where your snap won't set properly. But that, I think, is about the right thickness. We're working about 5-ounce leather or so. All right, moving on. We'll go ahead and set a Segma snap. Now, Segma snaps are pretty simple. The real trick here is leather thickness. These snaps are a little bit picky about how thick your leather is. Thin leather is okay. You may have to use a little bit smaller rivet side. These have the same basic components as far as having your cap, socket, post, and stud. They just look a little bit differently. The post is really, it's just like a double cap rivet is all it is. And so in a pinch, if you need to, you could use a smaller double cap rivet for your post side. Now we're going to set this through the finished side of the leather and set our stud on top. And we have got a specific Segma Snap setter. Again, having the proper setter is key here. If you try to do this with a different setter, it's just not going to work. So we'll use our stud side and just drive it down on there, just like you do with a spring snap. Make sure that's not going to turn or go anywhere. And then we have a little bit larger hole on this side to accommodate the larger socket of the Segma Snap. Now the socket gets pushed right through the hole. I believe that's a 5/32 hole. It's about as small of a hole as you can use with these line 16 Segma Snaps. And again, we can stick this on our anvil, or you can do it flat on the granite. And we've got a specific setter to go right inside that socket. All right, so that finishes up the Segma Snap. We've got the socket set in the cap. That should snap together there. What's nice about Segma Snaps is they're nice and low profile. They're not real big and bulky. They've got a smaller cap diameter, so they're good for small projects. Anything inside wallet interiors, coin purses, that kind of thing, they're great. So now we're going to move on to the last snap category, which is the line 20 and line 24 snaps. Both snaps take the same setting process, the only difference being the line 20 and line 24 have different setters. Line 20 is a little bit smaller diameter, takes a little bit smaller setter head. We're going to set the line 24 snaps. More specifically, we're going to set the pull the dot snaps, which are line 24 snaps, but it's a directional snap. And I'll show you on the pull the dot snaps, it actually has pull the dot printed on the cap. A lot of people like to use these for the thumb brakes on holsters or knife sheaths because they can only release from one direction. So what a lot of people like to do is actually align the word dot on the cap with the direction it's going to be released. Now the cap doesn't really have anything to do with the way it locks. That comes into play with the socket. Now I'll show you the socket. It's got two small tabs on it. One tab is on the inside, right here at the top. That's what actually locks the snap onto the stud. Now it can only release when pulling it from the opposite side. So if this was set in your project, it would only release pulling it from this side. So since we're putting this on a bracelet, we're going to want to make sure that tab on the inside is opposite the outside of your bracelet from which you're going to be pulling it from. Now the other tab on the reverse side keeps the snap from rotating on your project so that that direction doesn't change. So we're going to go ahead and place it on there. We've got our locking tab facing out. And we're going to grab our line 24 setter. Go ahead and set that on there. And we got the cap mushroomed inside of the socket well. It's nice and tight, it's not going to rotate anywhere. And then we'll go ahead and set the post and stud side. Now the post and stud, again, it's exactly the same as the line 24. The only difference being on the pull the dot, you've got a little bit more curvy profile. It's a little bit more of an hourglass shape to help that locking tab grab on. So we'll go ahead and take our post and stick it through our leather. Put our stud on top of the post. So you get your post set, push your cap on from the front side, pushing towards the dot. Should snap together and then pull apart in that one direction. Pulling from any other direction is the snap's not going to release. That's all we got. Be sure to like and subscribe if you got anything out of the video, and let us know if you have any questions or need any snaps. Thanks. Have a great day.